You just got hired at a company. Day one, they hand you a badge, a laptop, and say your office is on the 4th floor. Simple enough. Now imagine that entire office building, the walls, the floors, the security desk, the server room in the basement. All of it exists in the cloud. Not physically, digitally. That is a VNet. And if you do not understand it, nothing else in Azure networking makes sense. So let us fix that right now. An Azure Virtual Network, which everyone calls a VNet, is your private, isolated network space inside Microsoft Azure. Think of it as your own section of the internet that nobody else can touch unless you specifically let them in. When you create a VNet, you are making 3 decisions. First, you define an address space. That is your IP range, your turf, the digital property lines around your building. Second, you create subnets. Those are the rooms inside your building. The server room, the HR floor, the executive suite, each one is separate. Each one has rules about who gets in. Third, you define your boundaries. Rules about what traffic comes in, what goes out, and what gets blocked entirely. Now here is where it gets real. Everything you deploy in Azure, your virtual machines, your databases, your firewalls, your application servers, every single one of them lives inside a VNet. There is no such thing as a private Azure resource floating out in space by itself. No VNet means no private communication. Period. It is not optional. It is the foundation. Let me paint this picture more clearly because this is the concept that everything else builds on. Imagine you are the head of infrastructure for a brand new company. You walk into Azure, which is like walking into a massive city that never sleeps, and you say, I need a block. My block. Nobody else's. Azure looks at your subscription, checks your address range, and hands you a plot of digital land. That plot is your VNet. Your address space is the property line. Cross it without permission and you are trespassing. Now you start building inside your block. You put up one building for your web servers, another for your database tier, another for your management tools. Those buildings are your subnets. Each subnet has its own access rules. The web tier can talk to the database tier, but only on specific ports. The management subnet is locked down so tight that only administrators with the right credentials can even knock on the door. And from the outside world, nobody can see any of it unless you specifically open a door. Now what happens when your company merges with another company and their Azure environment needs to talk to yours? You build a bridge, a private, secure connection between the 2 city blocks, that is VNet peering. What happens when your employees in the physical office in New York need to connect to your Azure resources? You build a tunnel, an encrypted pathway from their building directly into your Azure block. That is your VPN gateway. And if you need something more serious, more reliable, with guaranteed bandwidth and no shared internet infrastructure, you lay down a dedicated fiber line between your office and Azure. That is ExpressRoute. But none of those connections, none of that infrastructure, none of it works if you did not claim your block first. The VNet is the block. Everything else is built on top of it. Now for the exam. Microsoft loves testing VNets because they are the foundation of everything. Here are the 3 things that will save you points on exam day. First, VNets are regional. They live in one Azure region. A VNet in East US does not automatically extend to West Europe. If you need resources in multiple regions talking privately, that requires a separate conversation about global VNet peering or virtual WAN. Second, address spaces cannot overlap if you want to peer to VNets. This is the #1 cause of peering failures. 2 VNets both using the 10.0.0.0/16 range cannot be peered. Full stop. Microsoft will ask you about this. Know it cold. Third, subnets within the same VNet can communicate with each other by default. No extra configuration needed. But communication between 2 different VNets always requires either peering or a gateway. Always. You cannot build anything in Azure networking until you claim your block. Everything else we cover in this series sits on top of this foundation. Day 1 done. See you tomorrow.